Hello, everyone. I got a new microphone. You probably can't tell. It is the exact same one as the last one I had, but that one had been, I don't know, bumped, jostled, dropped one too many times, and now it is in the great recording studio in the sky. We did our best to fix it as much as we could. We pulled that thing apart, we put it back together, we tried different cables, nothing was working, so I did have to get a new one. But it's okay. We're not letting it get us down, because this is a character that I have been so excited to do for so long. The vast majority of what I pull from the Winx source material to play with for this rewrite comes from seasons 1 to 4, but in this rare instance, we are looking beyond. This character is borrowed from the infamous season 8. If you are new here, my name is Teddy, and this is part a bajillion of my Winx Club rewrite. Way back in the super duper early days, I decided I wanted one of the tricks to not be an only child. Apparently, in season 8, Icy's backstory gets totally retconned, and it's revealed that she is actually a lost princess, just like Blue. She comes from a planet called Diamond, a place eternally blanketed in snow. But it's not a dead planet. It's different than Domino. It's different. There she had a sister named Sapphire. Sapphire was turned into a fox by a witch. A very problematic witch. Honestly, that's really all you need to know. That's kind of all there really is. I think. I'm sorry. I love you guys. I'm not watching season 8. I just read the wiki. As you may remember, if you've been here for a while, or if you just binge-watched the entire playlist, Icy's real name is Alicia, and she comes from an Arachleonite noble family. For generations, her family have hung their heads, portraying a quiet elegance as they performed the shame of their bloodline. The ancestral witches were originally seen as innovators, as brilliant minds that graced the world with a new perspective on magic. And for Renata, the daughter of the witch Belladonna, this prestige allowed her an opportunity to marry into one of the wealthiest families in all of Arachleon. Not only was her husband handsome and rich, but the two truly did love each other. And when Belladonna and her sisters revealed their true colors, he stood by his wife. The court of public opinion did not go easy on her. In response to this, Lady Renata made herself as small as possible, and her family never really left crisis management mode even after their public image had been fully redeemed. From a young age, Saifya seemed to be incredibly well suited to this lifestyle. She handled media attention with grace, embraced her etiquette training, and genuinely enjoyed the charity work her family had become known for. She was a sweet, altruistic young lady with a bright future ahead of her. For a long time, this seemed to apply to both the girls. Though Alicia was not as fond of the posing and pretense, it was what she was used to, and as long as she was with her sister, it was at least bearable. Then one day, the family was hit by an incredible tragedy. At only 17 years old, Saifya was kidnapped and held for a hefty ransom. Her family had worked so hard to create this reputation of dignity and virtue, but in a place like Arachleon, where the class divide is massive and many are desperate, they began to be seen as bleeding hearts. In this case, their perceived sentimentality led to a target being placed upon them. They were exactly the kind of people that would pay a steep price to bring their loved one home safe, and hopefully try avoiding resorting to violence. When designing Saifya, I wanted it to be apparent how different they are. However, I really did need the two of them to be visually similar. I've always imagined that Icy could never really shake her grief for her sister, and that's why she continued to emulate her in the way she looks. Walking the halls of Cloud Tower, there is definitely a typical kind of fashion amongst the students. Not that everyone is dressing the same, definitely not. Just that you really wouldn't see anyone else wearing pastels to the same extent as Icy. There is a difference, though, that may seem insignificant, but of course is actually me trying to do symbolism. Icy begins to always wear her hair up. She and her sister had always worn it loose previously, as that's how their mother had preferred it. Long, nearly white hair and pastels. It was kind of their signature look back then. When looking at them side by side, it needs to be clear how stifled and tense Icy is compared to her sister. I wanted their hair and eye colors to be similar, but for Saifya's to lean a bit warmer. Her eyes are a deep emerald green and her hair a true silver, as opposed to shades of blue like for Icy. And of course, Saifya was 2 years older. Despite these differences, they did look strikingly similar, to the point that when Saifya was taken, their parents could no longer stand to look at Alicia, and sometimes she could barely stand to look at herself. Everything about Saifya feels less severe. She didn't make it to the point in her life where she would have had anything to complain about. She came from a wealthy family. They went to parties and shows and vacations. Her parents were proud and happy. Her sister was her best friend, and she had just gotten her wings. She was just a teenage girl. And happy. When Saifya was kidnapped, she was freshly 17 and had no idea what her powers even were, let alone how to effectively use them. She was taken in the night, and her captor fled north, past the border and into Dominion territory. After the fall of Domino, Heraklion seized the opportunity to claim as much of the land as they could. However, there is a point where the mountains become too steep, the forests too dense, and the wind too frigid to justify pushing any further. Without the sacred hearth holding its piece of the dragon flame to warm the region, there was just no point. This place, this no man's land, is where the witch took Saifya. There, they holed up in the witch's cabin, with her expecting it would be only a short time before the money showed up at the drop-off point decreed in the ransom. But Saifya knew deep down that her family was not as altruistic as they led the public to believe, and while they surely would attempt to retrieve her, they would also surely use force. And she told this to her captor as well. Before there was any money or gold, there would be men arriving with hunting dogs and fanto blades. As days passed and her claims soon appeared to be true, the witch had grown angry, frustrated, and scared. Perhaps the fairy was right, and these greedy, two-faced nobles would show up here, armed and backed by soldiers, their hounds searching for Saifya's scent in the snow and ice. Well, the witch decided, they would do their job. They would find her all right, but not in the way they would expect. So, the witch transformed her prisoner into the image of a helpless little fox and sent her out into the frigid wilderness. But it seemed they had both been wrong. The family paid the ransom, and when there was still no sign of their daughter, they did indeed send the dogs. Saifya didn't stand a chance. Days in the harsh environment in an unfamiliar form had left her hungry and cold and scared. But when she heard the sound of hounds in the distance, she didn't feel relief like she thought she would. Gazing into the ice atop a frozen lake, she saw her reflection. There was no way for anyone to know she was anything other than a simple fox. And suddenly all hope was ripped away from her. The ones she had hoped would save her would instead bring about her end. Her legs gave out, and her frail little body slumped to the ground in defeat. But just then, a glow began to emit from the lake beside her. The ice cracked apart, somehow violent yet gentle. And from the water came a young woman of incredible beauty. She looked at Saifya with sadness in her eyes and cupped her muzzle in her hands. It was the first true warmth she had felt since being ripped from her home. A rush of energy surged through her body. She felt strength and bravery being gifted to her by this glowing lady. And she felt in her soul that now she too was ethereal. She too was a spirit of this forest. Her 4 paws remained, her form still a fox, but rather than being a fragile, dying creature, she was as mighty as the trees and almost as tall. Her fur shined as if the aurora borealis emanated from within her, and it was like she was one with the wind itself. You will no longer feel the bite of the frost, nor shall your belly ever again ache with hunger, the girl from the lake proclaimed. Saifya enjoyed the feeling of her hands upon her fur. While she no longer bristled against the cold, the warmth of her palms was something else entirely. She opened her eyes and managed to choke out a thank you, which surprised the spirit. She says she's never had a familiar speak aloud to her before. Then she introduces herself. "My name is Daphne," she says. "I am a nymph here. Who are you?" And in that moment, Saifya began to weep. She recounted everything that had led to her finally ending up at this lake. And by the end of the story, the nymph Daphne was crying too. She looks away sadly. "I lost my family as well, barely a year older than you. You and I are kindred spirits, it seems. I hope you will find peace here in Domino." And through all of these years, that is where Saifya has remained. a spirit amidst the snowy trees and ruins of an ancient kingdom. She wasn't scared. She wasn't alone. She had Daphne, the nymph who gave her a second chance and became her closest friend. Alongside them were her other familiars, little brown fawns and bear cubs and baby owls that had fallen from their nests, remaining in their new spirit forms until they finally reached their peace with this world. And one day, a few years ago, she saw the first living human since the day she left the witch's cottage. A young man, no, hardly even a teenager, trying to catch a rabbit. In the dim light of the sunset, she could just make out his face as it scrunched up in frustration watching the rabbit hop away, before he thrashed to the ground, shouting about his failure. Saifya watched as he lay in the snow, crying and shivering, until he grew quiet and seemingly fell asleep. Knowing he would not survive otherwise, she gently laid next to him, shielding him from the wind and keeping him warm. She stayed with him all night. His hair was blue. Saifya thought of her sister. When he awoke in the morning, he wasn't scared. He hugged the giant glowing fox and thanked her fiercely for protecting him. He asked her to stay with him while he tried to find his village, and together they went. She was shocked to discover that in a place she had only ever known as the epicenter of a great tragedy, people still managed to keep going. It was a small village built in the rubble of what was clearly once a grand city, but it seemed to be thriving. There was vibrant decorations and music, and when the village saw their boy return, they swarmed him with arms outstretched. From then on, Saifya would visit this little village often, becoming like its patron spirit, I suppose. She would walk the woods with that blue-haired boy, Nexus, as he drew his maps and built his forts. He even built her own little place to call home in a cave on the outskirts of their village. She was a little too big for his carpentry skills at the time. How distant she had found herself from the royal courts of Heraklion, and yet how normal this had all begun to seem. Her old life seemed so impossible now, so far removed from her day-to-day, yet somehow she still felt like herself. Sometimes the children of the village would even tie ribbons in her fur, just as she used to do with her own hands. Saifya's story is not over. We'll be seeing her again when the Winx travel to Domino, and one day she will see her sister again, though the circumstances may not be what she had hoped for. This was such an interesting one for me. I'd been planning her story since way back in the early days of this rewrite, and it felt so strange to finally get to it. I know I did steal her from the show, like everybody else in this rewrite so far, but it feels different somehow. But next video, we will get some actual original characters as we go through the ones I created from scratch for this rewrite. I am very excited. I'm just showing you OCs at this point. Until then, everyone, bye. I'm sure you noticed that was Nyx, the boy in the forest. I'm gonna try to get some of those other weird little side characters in, just for fun.